presentation of a bouquet and the Kada by Dr. B. Gayatri Devi, Regional Secretary, Karnataka, and presenting the memento is Mrs. Pareen Bagley, the Regional Secretary of Maharashtra. May we now request Dr. Stephan K. Thieringer for his keynote address.
I was going to start with good morning, but now that we're so late, it's good morning for me, still adjusting from the west to the east. And it's good afternoon to all of you. Have you ever heard in school that a student said, just what he said? When I heard Shouraf talking, just what he said. He must have stolen my entire keynote because all the points he spoke about is exactly what to speak about. What he didn't realize is that even though he was running away from school, he was actually creating the first educational simulation. Because my cricket story continues, and I became very close about a decade ago with Shrikant, who now lives in Chennai. But also, while he didn't realize it, Shouraf was applying mathematics and physics by the perfect, I think it's left foot forward, and hitting the bat just at the right speed. So that is, in education, could be called a simulation. Mrs. President, guests of honor and distinguished guests, it's a privilege, and I've had the privilege to India and to visit India many, many times. The first time I came to Kolkata on my first visit to India, exactly a decade ago, in spring of 2008. And the first city, which was from there on always in my memory, visiting Kolkata, the city of joy, is right here. Before I came to India the first time, I was asked to read a book, the book called Shantaram. Bank robber in Mumbai, Australian, finally gives up his hidden life, goes back to Australia and comes back and writes a book about all the sensory experiences he had and the imagination it was transmitting to me. The smells, the visuals, difficult conversations and easy conversations. And it was inviting me to think about the journey I was taking on in culture, in language, and everything what made India what it was and is today. I also very, very quickly realized that I was not learning India in 1 or 2 visits. I learned that every time I came back, multiple times a year over the next 5 years, I would learn more and more different things. I learned to be humble, more spiritual, more able to be connected, and willing to be connected, what made India and its people India. And I've been through all the versions of India, from exciting to beautiful to incredible India. My passion I developed about India, the respect you all taught me about people, country, I today so appreciate and I'm very grateful for. You kind of put me through India school, first kindergarten, then preschool, then grammar school, a little college and university, and I'm continuously realizing that when the content and curriculum is India, I will never, ever graduate. As the layers are endless, and my curiosity and fascination is even more endless. I remember in one of my first trips, when I was leading the US IBC delegation for then President Obama, I cried when leaving India in Delhi when taking off by airplane. So thank you very, very much for welcoming me back and allowing me the privilege to address this plenary today and all of you distinguished guests and delegates. Today, I want to talk about superheroes. I will talk a little bit about neuroscience and why I do think that schools need a reboot. As some of you may know, some of you may have guessed, I'm European. I'm raised in Stuttgart, Germany. I have a baccalaureate degree, and I've been exposed to the German study rigor. We learned many things. I grew up in a very traditionalist household. Most importantly, words like vulnerability, openness, the transparency of emotions were most certainly not a conversation at my house. Still today, guys with strong fathers relate to that. I'm still trying to convince my 92-year-old father that I'm enough. And ladies, I'm sure the same applies for you with strong mothers. Now, one of my first fond memories goes back to school, and if I can get the next slide, to those 3 lines. And engraved in my memory, those 3 lines are forever. If I would ask you the name of the last Nobel Peace Prize winner of 2010, could you tell me? Probably not. If I ask you the name of your first or second grade teacher, you all suddenly have perfect recall. It is amazing what happens when people truly touch you. And that's where understanding simple facts of neuroscience becomes so valuable in the classroom. See, when we become engaged and when we are not actively disengaged and we feel purpose and reason for doing what we are doing, magic suddenly happens. Our trust levels rise and our human chemistry lab starts working overtime, and oxytocin production is up as well. The perpetuum mobile of that is what creates happiness. Think of it as your happiness lab. So back to the 3 lines, one of my favorite school memories I will share with you. In Germany, we had to learn writing in lines like that. 3 lines, and the letter L was my holdup. My mother was a very patient and wonderful woman, but for some reason that L made her crazy. When you properly write the L in cursive, it is supposed to lean slightly to the right, as you know. It had to sit between the lines and be equally spaced from beginning to end. My teacher, whose name today I still remember fondly, was Mrs. Klotz. If I would walk by her on the street, I would not remember her. But I recall so well how she made me feel. And you will all understand in a moment why. The assignment, as we in kids in 2nd grade were learning to properly handwrite in cursive, was all the letters of the alphabet. Every day, 1 letter. That day, as I mentioned before, was the letter L. I was not a kid of great discipline in school, even though very gifted. But homework was something I saw as necessary evil. And on a fun scale, a -5. In my work today, I talk a lot about fun and stimulus versus the things we need to do and we know have a lot of return of investment, but fun factor 0. Back to the L's. So I'm trying and writing my L's and I cannot get them leaning right. My mother, for some reason, gets further mad and she's losing her patience. She keeps ripping page after page out of my writing diary. Back then, there were booklets in the middle with a thread. And when you would rip 1 page out on the left, another would fall on the right. So my booklet, as Mom is ripping out pages, is getting thinner and thinner. My L's aren't getting any better. I'm upset, I'm sad, I start crying. My mother gets upset even further and keeps telling me to focus on my L, and all I do is cry. I start crying on the paper where I'm writing. So not only my L's are leaning left, they're written in ink, and the ink with my salty tears mixed are smeared all over the paper. Talk about 2nd grade student drama, full out. After about 4 to 5 pages of left-leaning L's, I think page 5 or 6 was finally standing straight. Still no lean to the right, but at least secured, not to fall any further to the left. Mom was happy enough to let it be, and my diary, wrinkled from wet tears, a true work of art, went back into my school bag. I presented that work to Mrs. Klotz. Old school, as I'm sure many of you still do today, each student in line bringing up their homework for immediate review. An immediate grade is being dropped onto the student's work of art. So here I'm standing in line with a wrinkled paper. Mrs. Klotz looks at it and says in German, "I can see you work hard on learning to do them right." Now standing there at 1.30 meters, I was unable to see what she was actually writing onto the piece of paper. She handed my journal back. I walked back to my seat. I sat down, opened it, and I hardly could believe what I saw. She graded my work with a 1+. That's the equivalent in Germany to an A+ in the United States. And all I was left with is the feeling of being grateful, immensely relieved, but understood, most importantly, in the most empathetic way. She saw I worked hard. She saw the paper had been wet, and my journal, obviously, was thinner than everyone else's, but still an A+. Back then, I thought she was just nice. But the fact is, she was back then far ahead of the then usual pedagogical standards. So this is also where, for all of you and for me then, the also famous Maya Angelou quote comes in. We may not remember what the person looked like, but we will always remember how they made us feel. That moment, that memory, has manifested itself onto me as her memory as a teacher and as a human being who has been very impressionable on me. My journey in education as a student, after grammar school and college, university, MBA and PhD studies, and a lifelong learner who I consider myself to be, has rather been a roller coaster. I grew up in a traditionalist household, and conformity and doing what's expected was the only way to go. In my work with clothing companies, schools, universities, healthcare companies, banks, realty conglomerates, and especially in the United States, active disengagement is a big factor. Currently, the estimation of active disengagement in corporations is at about 90%, 90% in the United States. Not much different in many other countries. When an employee receives negative attention, then the engagement ratio elevates to approximately 35%. Like an abusive relationship, I'll let you know by matter of yelling at you that you actually matter. We've created with that a recipe for disaster. And to further on, add some good words with a few very negative words, raises the engagement to 55 to 60%. The work I've been doing with a colleague of mine, who sadly just passed away about a week ago, is around the theme of conversational intelligence. You all have heard about IQ and EQ. We also talk about CIQ and HIQ. In corporate today, could I get the next slide also, please? In corporate today, we measure happiness, overall energy at work and productivity. We look at discretionary progress towards a goal. That means you get to decide how to get it done and do it. Studies at Harvard Business School in Boston by Teresa Amabile show that progressing towards a goal makes people feel the happiest. Knowing where you are, what's next, and where you're going. Coincidentally, as I was writing this about happiness, I realized and was reminded that I will be speaking in the City of Joy. When you're in the City of Joy, a site that is the title of a book I read many years ago, you'll also be introduced to the legacy and story of Rabindranath Tagore. And one thing Tagore and writers do and know how to do is to tell a good story. What we all know and know by experience around the many stories we have read, that there is one very disappointing factor in most stories. And that is that in every good story, there is only one superhero. So let me take you through the pieces which make for a really good story. Take a look right behind me. Now, there's this dude showing up, and he has a challenge and an issue. Dude needs an amazing amount of help and wants his or her power story, dream, aspiration, or mission in some way completed. He or she has to drive that it needs to get done. And as the journey starts, dude or dudette meets the sidekick. Now the sidekick is the guide. Now guide develops the plan, and dude or dudette follows it. Now if it's a good plan, yay, we have success. And if it's not, it's crash and burn and failure. So what I invite you to do now is insert yourself into this slide and replace the dude with the student, and the guide is you. Imagine taking this story recipe and applying it to yourself, your life, maybe your early life, and the help and support you actually received or needed, or simply were seeking. Aren't you the main character in the story, in your own story? This is not about being selfish. It's about having a healthy attitude towards self, self-awareness, self-care, and being respectful of your own needs. So as teachers, you're the guide who provides the plan and serves and supports the main character of the story. And the main character, that superhero in your world, is the student, no one else. And just like in business, and small and large enterprises being of service, supporting and setting just that example of leadership, that's what being a good guide is all about. And great leadership is not about being selfish and being self-centered. It is, in fact, about service and supporting the ones who need it the most and can benefit from all of your experience and expertise. So from here on out, I invite you to please remember, there's only one superhero in each story. And guidance is about service and support. And for that matter, we need to trust. Leadership is always about building trust. And trust is cultural. Trust is conversational. And culture starts where the conversation starts. Let me show you a little more about that. So when we meet each other, can I get the next slide, please? So when we meet each other, we explore each other. We're resisting each other. We listen, we see, we take in. By nature, we have learned and we are trained to be critical and judge, and we assume. Not a bad thing in itself, but acknowledgement of my own assumption and judgment allows me to stay in the game. My favorite word, embracing all of this, staying in the game, is curiosity. Let me ask you, how curious are you really about your colleagues right here today? How curious are you really truly about your students? When did you last really think about what I call the 4 E's of education: experience, environment, and emotion? When we interact with each other, can I get the next slide, please? When we interact with each other, we forget that everyone around us has 4 different E's. You have 4 different E's than I. You have 4 different E's than I. They're different. We tend to make mine yours. If you don't see things the way I do, or feel, or understand, then you're wrong. Well, you're wrong. Transformation, teaching, mentoring, guiding all starts at the very emotional level. And the permission the other human being gives you to lead. Leadership, if in person or by thought, is earned, not taken. So as you go through life as teachers, please remember this, that there's one superhero in every story, and the only story the parents and the children see is their own. The parents see their kid, and the kid needs to see themselves. And you are called to be the guide, which the child met in a serendipitous moment in their life at the right time, hopefully. And the only one to truly make that right moment we look back at from the present to be called, that is you. Because at that moment, it has become your responsibility to guide the journey. I often ask myself, how has my formal education impacted me? And what's the triangulation between education, knowledge, and competency? When we look at the labor market today, and that applies all over the world, we look for talent. We look for people who can make an impact, apply relevant knowledge to a business, a company, and respond timely to the needs in the market now, the business, the people around them. We're looking for solutions now, rapid deployment and rapid response to a problem, and most important, shareholder return. Ongoing, real-life preparation. The true market relevance in school today is at best mediocre. So how do we connect real world to school world? See, we create the basic problem when kids grow up and then repeat it in business. High performance culture in company is what is sexy today to talk about. We seek curious, responsible adults and human beings. That's the ideal avatar for HPC, high performance culture. But by the time kids grow up, to the age of 15, what I call the KGU paradox, kids growing up paradox, we have essentially conditioned them to lay low while we ask them the opposition and the opposing question. Why aren't you not more curious? As young children, with all their inherent curiosity, we told them, don't do this, don't touch that. You can't do this, you can do this, but leave that. Because young kids touch and taste and everything they can get their hands, their mouth, and their feet on. As educators, we all collectively have a responsibility which goes far beyond the learning content and standards of education. How do we create an environment, whatever we define the environment to be, that is attractive to students, where students actually want to engage? Where we provide an environment, an ecosystem of education which is multifaceted and goes far beyond just a book and a test. Stimulus in education needs to go beyond the book and reading content online. It needs to be engaging, and thus we need to design the experience based on the respondent to the best and most accurate data we have available. Data in neuroscience, behavioral science, psychology, and pedagogy. Case studies and global benchmark. Yes, that must include comparing your classroom and their physical layouts to the rest of the world, and countries leading the charge here are, for example, Finland. We also need to acknowledge that tests truly are a weak measure of comprehension, and aside the creation of competition may serve very little to actually progress the student in life and finding themselves. And as the theme of this conference is enlightenment in education, I invite you to do the literary analysis of the word itself. Enlightenment, if I may have the next slide, please. Enlightenment, by definition, is about me, only me, self-reflective. It's about awareness and helping me to find myself. For me, back then, that was how they made me feel. Enough with the feeling and emotional stuff. Let's go all traditionalist for a moment. Let's reminisce a little bit about gaming, teacher education, play progression and process, and what I call a full school reset. In 1953, psychology professor Skinner, he was a leading proponent of what he back then called radical behaviorism, devoted his career to studying feedback. He is the guy who developed that little box where he trained rats to pull and push levers and trained pigeons to play ping pong with their beaks. After completing that, as he quotes, he turned his attention to a particular subset of the human animal, the school child. Skinner invented his teaching machine, if I may have the next slide, please. Roughly the size and shape of a typewriter, the student progressed independently through a curriculum, answering test items and getting instant feedback with a few pulls of a lever. Quote, "The student very quickly learns to be right. His work is pleasurable. He or she does not have to force himself to study." A classroom in which machines are being used is usually the environment and scene of intense concentration. Back then, with hardly any hindrance from peers or teachers, thousands of students could receive knowledge directly from a single textbook box. He then told the Harvard Crimson magazine in Boston, "There's no reason why the schoolroom be any less mechanized than a kitchen." Now, almost 70 years later, Skinner's reductionist thinking and approach about teaching and learning unfortunately continue to haunt public education today, especially as we're once upon called upon to embrace technology. Digital fluency is often called a 21st century skill, if I may have the next slide. Equally necessary for personal workplace success and for competitive edge. Teaching machines with capabilities beyond Skinner's imagination have proliferated this century again. Curiosity today by students is being very quickly satisfied by quick moves of their thumbs on a mobile device. And I've heard many times quotes along the lines of, "When you manage an education system that's rich in potential as ours, with a sense of crisis, all crisis does is shut down possibility. We try to reach for the proven, for the stuff that works, the stuff we know that works, and practices on the edge, they get ignored." That, my friends, to me, is Einstein's definition of insanity. We are doing the same thing, but we're expecting different results. Our societies and our personal needs have changed. Our capabilities have grown. But we still speak like Latter-day Skinners. This echoes in the current chatter of the surrounding tech culture, innovations like gamification. Skinner once used food pellets to induce pigeons, as I mentioned earlier, to roll balls back and forth with their beaks. And corporate, as well as education leaders alike, have embraced the idea of dispensing nuggets of fun to shape desired behaviors in humans. For businesses, gamification-based training promises to maximize profits and employee productivity. For schools, it seems like a way to motivate students to perform basic and drilled memorization, and to do so very cost-effectively. But the education system at core still continues to pursue Skinner's goal of efficiency and automation. We all truly know that the current system is in fact outdated. We have batch processing, mass production model of education that served us well when we wanted to achieve a society in which we were sending a lot of people into low-skill, low-knowledge jobs. But for high-skill, high-knowledge job in the current information age, we do need, in fact, a very different systems. digital society and economy, where we are all saturated by screens, we need to rethink what school can and should do for today's school children. We need to move beyond just playing at games, and we need to provide meaningful choices. And the open-ended, experimental spirit of play is essential to a deep game experience. Or if we don't, we're simply continuing to make what I like to call kick the puppy games. Would you like to kick the puppy? Yes or no? That's not much of a game. Games have more richness than is dreamt about in gamification's philosophy. In the 1980s, researchers then asked, what makes the repetitive task of feeding money into a machine and controlling a joystick more appealing than the repetitive work of schoolwork? The idea to apply the mechanics of gaming and the reward system to make educational software, the use of a drill and practice mechanic to teach content made them look an awful lot like multiple choice tests, except that they used some character to dance to the right answer. Today we know that learning by doing has more conditions for success than just by telling. This is guided by now decades of work in developing virtual and augmented realities for science students. There is, in fact, pedagogical value of virtual worlds. It is all about how learners reason about complex causality. Environmental science poses a particular challenge, as I know, for science teachers. It is easy to demonstrate a chemical experience or a reaction or a physics principle right before a student's eye within a contained hour of time. A beaker fizzes, a catapult flings a tennis ball across a room. Within a graspable time frame, students can complete a hands-on lab from start to finish within a single class. In environmental sciences, though, in which developments unfold over a period of time and in much longer scale, the mind's tendency to focus on events rather than processes dominates. It is hard for students to track complex causality when it's distributed. Non-obvious variables further frustrate the efforts of children and many adults to understand systems such as food webs or global weather patterns. As educators, we do forget that students have been taught to see science as facts rather than a process of making meaning. A group in the United States designed EcoMute, which is a multi-user virtual environment, as a simulation with a mystery at heart. Students explore the environment around a pond at many different times and at many different points. We use a virtual net that allows students to trawl for organisms in the water, and other tools provide options to record the data, the temperature, and various oxygen levels. Students can plot changes over time on a graph, and then they use their own avatars to speak with other participants in the gaming environment and simulation in the area. In the simulation one day in late summer, pixelated carcasses of fish turn up on the shore. It is a fish kill. Now the students must investigate what went wrong, proposing hypotheses and gathering evidence. In this moment, they're called upon their knowledge to use and learn with a different mindset that is the usual mindset in the classroom. Unlike in an exam, they don't know what information to bring to bear to the experience. Today, we still tend to cue students. Here, they are not cued. Maybe we need to start not to characterize such virtual environments as games. Games often have objectives, find out why, but because that objective is discovery, the activities suddenly have a non-competitive, exploratory nature. Maybe we all need to call it simulation instead of game. And I promise you, in many of the conversations I had, it will lower the resistance to trying out a new activity in schools. In many conversations I've had with administrators of schools and my own experience in global education, psychological and cultural barriers seem to slow down education more than any other field. Having been an MIT Global Strategy Advisor for many years, I will share a little about a group at MIT called MIT's Education Arcade. Some of you may be familiar with already, who works on augmented realities. At the beginning, educators would ask not to use the word game in schools because the principal will kick it right out. And now, there's actually people who are saying just the opposite. Oh, is that a game? I'd love to try it out at my school. The global progress this particular group has made is significant. Hubs like Wisconsin's Game Learning Society, GLS, and MIT Games to Teach initiative, which was the original forerunner of the arcade, in the early 2000s have fed the larger industry a lot of pedagogical models, game projects, and human talent. Without actually investing into the education market themselves, the biggest companies support the diversity of the larger habitat. You all may know companies like Zynga, creators behind Farmville and Words with Friends. They operate CoLab, co.lab, and provide office space, tools, mentoring, and resources to young startup edtech companies, including some that germinated as university projects. Electronic Arts, which is the company behind Madden, NFL, and SimCity, funds the nonprofit Glass Lab, which develops its own games and aspires to be a resource for educators as well as for commercial developers who need assessment metrics and data to make their projects more educationally sound. Just take a look at iTunes. The paradox is that even though there are more games than ever before, education games remain marginal in schools. It's a special treat for kids who finish their work early or remedial intervention for the ones who cannot. We keep them occupied. And that is clearly an underuse of a powerful resource and further widens the digital divide already, disadvantaging poor as well as minority students. Families who know and can afford such resources and enrichment channels will seek them out. Linguist James Paul Gee claimed that Pokemon could be considered perhaps the best literacy curriculum ever conceived. I want you to think with me a moment about it. Pokemon's trading cards enabled millions of kids to master a very complex taxonomy of various imaginary creatures. They all had specialized traits. Compare the average middle school classroom to the learning space within games themselves. And then the culture surrounding games, for example, the online game Minecraft, and its array of blueprints, discussion boards, and how-to videos. Here's my question for you. Which one of those provides a more authentic model for how to pursue work and personal interests in the 21st century? Applying real-world and global application to learning and teaching, ask yourself this: how do you work day to day? Many of you, and certainly industry, are sitting in front of a computer daily. You've got a big project you're trying to come up with. You're on the phone, you're supposed to write a paper, you're talking to some dude in your office next to you, or you're talking to some dude on the telephone in Singapore. You probably have something on your wall with all the sources where you get information from and how you're going to be putting together that paper. There are online resources and how-to guides. There are resources on how to write. You're the one who's putting all this together. Guess what? You just created your own learning environment. Eric Zimmerman, a game designer and prof at NYU, argues that the rise of computers parallels the resurgent cultural interest in games. We need to realize future generations will understand their world in games and systems, and they will respond to it as players and game designers. They will navigate, manipulate, and improve upon them. As a resident in Boston today, I will share another project initiated in Boston. This one was called Project Headlight, a program that started all the way back in 1985 and brought hundreds of computers into public education spaces in Boston. MIT was asked to develop activities that immersed students in a programming language called Logo. Following pedagogical ideals, the researchers didn't want the computer lab to seem like a locked room at the back end of the hallway, and they did not want it to be removed from daily life and activities. They wanted to know that students were interested. Those were the days of Sonic Hedgehog and Super Mario. Kids back then in the 80s, they really wanted to program their own games. And in the 1980s, it was relatively common for gamers to dabble in programming. A range of books taught programmers how to make or modify games using old languages like BASIC and Pascal. MIT even went ahead, designed a curriculum in which older students would design software for children in the lower grades, in subjects ranging from fractions to marine habitats. The kids quickly realized that Nintendo-style games was beyond their skill set. But in art classes, they could and were invited to think like professionals, designing boxes and creating advertisements of the kind of games they wanted to see in stores. Then came the advent of CD-ROMs and software packages, and soon after, internet browsers. And the personal computer suddenly felt so friendly that programming really seemed irrelevant to its operation. Now, computers came preloaded and densely written with default systems and applications, and suddenly they did everything what the average user required. The incentive to look behind the curtain was removed. Creation and design were once again thought of as the domain of just experts. Schools restricted themselves to now teaching PowerPoint and touch typing. We need to realize kids love the idea of making their own interactive stories, animations, and games, and hardly realizing while doing it that the projects make use of algebra and algorithms. The programming tool Scratch was composed of command blocks that could snap together like Legos to achieve different effects. That was liberating learners from the errors made through typos or the syntax of traditional programming and languages. Once done, one very important piece was in that application and use of Scratch. There was a share icon, and along with it, an online community where users can and could display comments and peek into the backend of other people's projects. The MIT team built social values behind it, like collaboration, tinkering, and remixing into the culture of coding itself. Scratch launched more than 10 years ago in 2007. It's been translated by now into 40 languages and used by millions worldwide, including people well outside the target age group, like the hundreds enrolled in Harvard's most popular class, CS50, Introduction to Computer Science. Some of you may have taken that class. It's even used in primary classrooms. In 2009 already, the online community hosted by MIT spun off into Scratch App. In this virtual space, they can show one another what's possible. Let's pull up that slide from Scratch App quickly, please. And that leads me to the next point. Teaching teachers. Aside the obvious need for systemic change, we need to simply empower every single educator, absent official guidance and mandates. What if actively promotion would happen of choose your own adventure ethos, so teachers, all of you, would feel emboldened to adapt lesson plans freely? If Skinner once compared teachers to line cooks, let's all of you imagine as Michelin chefs. A growing component of work is to convene educators in person as well as online. As an example, Scratchit began to host monthly meetups at MIT Media Lab, welcoming participants at all levels to gather. Collectively, we set an agenda and not only sharing good experiences, but also frustrations. And most importantly, expertise. We all know that teaching digital confidence is often the most challenging part. When frustrated by technology, whether a misformatted Google application or a snarl of code, children and adults reflexively ask for intervention. The important part here is that they just need the courage to try. Fail forward, learn from your mistakes. That is something we teach in innovation and ideation every single day in corporate and in enterprise. Why are we not teaching that in school? Students are accustomed to feeling this uncertainty, teachers less so. Implicitly, many of you regard expertise as your source of legitimacy, a store of knowledge in the form of facts to be transmitted to children. You want all the solutions to all possible problems before you feel comfortable leading a lesson. And because computers are only the beginning to return in the classroom in these new ways, very few of you have the expertise. Oftentimes, teachers fear the encounter of an untraceable technical issue that causes the day's lesson to dissipate and break down. Imagine a simple real-life lesson example for you here. Project malfunctions, reread the code with a critical eye, check for mistakes, enlist the help of another student or collaborator, see the project with fresh eyes, find successful examples to analyze and emulate. The lesson, I think, is very simple. A teacher can model problem solving by itself for students, even if you don't have the solution. More so, uncertainty may actually, to teach, be more preferable. It will make room for ideation and spontaneous discovery and more authentic and rewarding classroom interactions. I also believe that we are in dire need of School 3.0. We do know that there's an ongoing battle between enthusiasm and old calcified classroom culture. How can we prevent the rare, well-working initiatives and pilots in digital media from becoming one-offs, forgotten, brushed away, amid competing demands for educators? My true fear is that we're building a path to nowhere. Digital does have a presence in almost every aspect of modern life. Institutions like schools remain vital levers. Schools have the role to promote more democratic and equitable participation in society's virtual marketplace. A public with incredibly uneven rates of digital illiteracy creates major gaps between creators and users, those who design the system and those at its mercy. One of my favorite quotes is by media theorist Doug Rushkoff, and it warns, program or be programmed. Skinner's test machine was basic and elementary. Its interface literally only the narrowest of windows through which students squinted at curricula printed on cylinders of paper. Today the windows are so much larger, offering portal to most likely infinite information. Reality is, when computers first entered classrooms on a larger scale, it was banks of monitors installed to speed up basic learning under a one-size-fits-all model. In every discussion we have today, if we're taking the position of futurists, technologists, innovators, teachers, or school administrators, we need to re-examine what teachers teach within and also bring renewed discussion of how. With tools like augmented reality, games, and coding, it's possible to imagine a model of schooling that departs from its behaviorist past. We need to become more contemporary in teaching and promote inquiry, collaboration, experimentation, and play. In 2019, we are challenged to create a joint vision. In this vision, teachers and students are partners in a joint venture that is intrinsically human. Communities, co-creation and collaboration in school. We need to talk more about learning communities and the reach and impact of such communities and the reach they can have, especially in the landscape of globalization of education. Communities represent strength, and communities also represent support, access, and diversity, not just in terms of people, but also in terms of knowledge. Community is one of the four core essentials that make education and learning highly effective. Cognitive research has told us that environments that actually promote learning best have four aspects to it. They focus on learners, they're well organized in knowledge, there's ongoing assessment for understanding, and there's community support and challenge. I encourage you to do formative assessment, community-centered. It will foster norms for people and learning from one another. In such a community, students are encouraged to be active and constructive participants. They learn from their mistakes, and intellectual camaraderie fosters support. My company has deep research available about that in corporate and large enterprise. We talk in companies about attrition, quit rates, and retention of high-performance employees. Imagine if students would be employees of a corporation. What would that quit rate look like based on what they think they signed up for? Think back at your own time in school. Or maybe a free agent, fill in parents in sports, and would their manager look for a new contract for them? Another significant piece of the digitization of school and the landscape of education are people and the human dynamics we're confronted in. That, in my opinion, requires to look at something we have started to discuss under the title of digital citizenship. Can I get the next slide, please? All of the aforementioned is part of the classroom leadership, the institution itself, and even on a policy level. But let me be clear again, the change we need in classroom to be contemporary environments of learning and teaching will not be affected by a state of national policy. It is our influence on people and our opportunity to rethink schools as we know them. We have long understood that at the enterprise level. So maybe what's really at stake here is your leadership to drive forward and challenge yourself and others around you. And that, my new friends, requires leadership. In Boston, at an event earlier this year, we were talking about improving schools and the art of leadership. It was clear that for a school principal, the task of leading school improvement can be daunting. Schools are large organizations filled with those most unpredictable of things, people. There's also a place where there's a plethora of other processes. There's no question that augmented data analysis, blended digital tools, and connected networks will reign amongst technology innovations in the coming year. The convergence of all of this and using it to support a continuous innovation process will be front and center. Artificial intelligence, augment data-driven initiatives, and analysts expect machine learning to play an important role in 2019, offering support for tasks that may require more time, energy, and training than teachers and administrators have at their disposal. Teachers will rely on data analysis to improve their relationship with students, especially as personalized learning programs become more widely adopted. Data collection and analysis has led to innovations in student assessment design, helping educators pinpoint where students are struggling and adjusting coursework to supplement those areas. The concept of digital twins, digital backpacks, longitudinal interoperable student records, this can and will serve to analyze how individual students learn and to create more effective, personalized learning curricula. As this transition continues, schools will need to be mindful of how they design their learning environments. Mobile devices are a hot topic, and I believe that the addition to the classroom provides students with equity, empowerment, and a better understanding of complex concepts. Some people say those devices create distractions. I say they offer educators an array of new pedagogical practices that potential makes it a mandate to employ and use in all of your institutions. Remember, the generation of children growing up now and their parents have a very different understanding of tech than their own parents had and were willing to employ and engage with, inside as well as outside the classroom. Parents today view technology as relevant and urgent as a foundational base, how their children will enter into the marketplace after school. Educators, teachers, please listen. The human factor will never go away, but instead of being the superhero, be the best guide you can be and think of yourself as the irreplaceable GPS of education. Many of you get lost on long drives without Google Maps. See, we do need and we want you. While the debate is ongoing, reports from around the world, countries like China, Germany, Japan, Switzerland, France, Finland, and the US demonstrate already the positive impact of mobile devices and digital classrooms around the world. As teachers, in order to effectively and efficiently integrate digital tools, content, and resources into a classroom, you need planning time, access to classroom technology, professional development, and technology. So here it is. You all have been given the immense privilege of shaping people and their futures. But I do ask you to start shaping it as much with the understanding of the individual and the world they will enter into, and help them write their story and allow them to be the superhero every kid wants to be. In today's world, it is not about conformity and doing what you're told. Today's world is about finding myself, my passion, my dialogue. Compassion and empathy are the foundation we need to set as stewards of the next generation. It has never been in history that 4 different generations are in the workforce, and never has a generation had 3 generations to look up to. So use your responsibility wisely and inspire the next generation. Can I get the next slide, please? Now go out, co-create, and most importantly, celebrate. Thank you.